Alright. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Late Night Tips. I'm lucky enough to have the Behringer DeepMind 12 desktop in the studio for the weekend. So tonight we're going to answer a fundamental question. Should I buy the DeepMind 12? Let's get right into it. I think that the DeepMind 12 is an amazing polyphonic synthesizer, and I'm actually surprised by how well put together it is. So in this little review I'm going to go through all the things that I like about the synthesizer, and then I'm going to share things that I'm not so crazy about. And then I'm going to build a patch from scratch, and I'm going to walk you through all the cool functionalities that I discovered during those 2 days here in the studio. So first of all, I was rather surprised by the footprint. It's actually a really big synthesizer, especially when you compare it to Mark I Elektrons. It's really surprising how much room it takes in my studio. So if I wanted to get it, I would really need to move some things around. Second thing is that it's actually really well designed. A lot of thought has been put into integrating the software and the hardware and the screen and the interface and generally the workflow of the synthesizer. I was also really happy with the calibration of the faders because they're really musical and it's really a pleasure working with them. The next amazing thing about the DeepMind 12 is that I'm really in love with the effects on the unit. The effects were actually outsourced from Electronic, and I've been a fan of their company for a very long time, mostly for guitar stuff. These effects do sound great on the unit. I'm a bit of a reverb snob myself, and I have to admit that the reverb on the unit is probably the best reverb I've heard on an analog synthesizer. And as a side note, I really do believe that outsourcing effects algorithms is going to be the future for synthesizer manufacturers. So Behringer is really blazing the trail in here. The next amazing thing about the DeepMind 12 is the mod matrix on it. I think it's really deep, and I love the concept of assigning one LFO to up to 8 destinations. This is just amazing. So when it comes to a couple of drawbacks, I think there should be more knobs and more buttons on it, because sometimes you are forced to go into a menu to perform something really simple. Another slight disappointment is that there is no external audio processing, there's no audio in, and with those amazing effects it would be great to have the possibility to actually process external audio using those effects. It's a bit of a shame, but at this price point I guess it's justified. And also a couple of people mentioned, and I actually tend to agree with them, that the synth engine is a little bit simplistic. There could be more to the synth engine itself. But probably my biggest gripe with the DeepMind 12 is how loud it is. And I realized that you can actually turn down the fan in the menu so that it's not so loud. But I haven't done it because it's not mine, it's just here for 2 days, so I'm not going to mess with it. And the second thing is, the fan is there for a reason. It's actually disturbingly loud, almost as loud as my overhead projector right there. At the end of the day, it is an amazing polysynth that really shines when you play it polyphonically. It also has the best effects in the game. You could think of it as a Juno on steroids, which is a pretty good recommendation. So let's try and design a patch from scratch, completely from nothing. So I'm going to start with an init sound. And how you do it is very simple. You press and hold prog, and then you press compare. And you end up with the default program. Let's hear how it sounds. So here's the basic sound of the oscillator. The oscillators themselves are not really special, just a basic run-of-the-mill DCO, kind of similar to, I would say, Novation Base Station 2, but still a pretty clean, nice sounding oscillator. So for oscillator 1, you have the sawtooth and a square, and they can play together. And as far as I know, there are no separate levels for those waveforms, and it would be really helpful to have those levels in here. And it's mostly because once you start messing with pulse width modulation in here, pretty nice, but you add the sawtooth in here, I feel that the pulse width modulation is getting a little bit less pronounced in here, buried under the sawtooth. Then you have the second oscillator. Sounds pretty good. I like the overtones in here. And also, the noise source is amazing. I really like this noise source in here, and in the manual they mentioned that they treated it with a high-pass filter so it doesn't add unnecessary mud to the mix. Pretty cool. So when you press edit in here, you can actually select the source for your pulse width modulation, and it can be manual in here, or it could be, for example, the LFO, or it could be the filter envelope, the second envelope. And then this knob becomes the depth. So let's go to the filter in here. This really sounds cool, and it's actually very straightforward, very simple. We can do the same thing with the pitch modulation. So we can actually select the source to LFO1. And when it's done like that, this becomes the depth. Another cool thing that you can do with the DeepMind 12 is actually you can add a little bit of a drift to the oscillator. You do it in here. You actually go to Edit, Unison, and you select Oscillator Drift. And it actually does have strong influence on the sound of the oscillators. It really starts sounding analog and warm and sort of alive. It's a pretty cool feature. When it comes to the filter, it's straightforward. Musical, I like the resonance. It does have a high-pass filter, which, as you might know, I think is a necessity on a polyphonic synthesizer. Which brings us to the envelopes, and I really like how they're handled. You'd notice that when you change the modes, there are actually 3 envelopes. The position of the faders does not reflect what's going on with the envelope. However, you have the screen in here, and you can see all 3 of them, and you can clearly see what's going on in here. And I would really like to emphasize how well calibrated those envelopes are. It's actually amazing. Let me give you an example. I'm going to activate an arpeggiator. I think that they're musical, intuitive, and fun, and the calibration is really precise and really well put together. You also have those curves in here, which are really, really well designed. Let's check the filter envelope. And let's add some curves to them. It's actually really easy to design your curves using that function. And now let's check out that reverb. It's in here, and let's go with the room reverb. And look at the amount of parameters in here. It's beautiful. The things that you can do. So even when you add some high frequencies to the reverb, you can hear that it sounds really good, really full, really lush, which means that those are really advanced algorithms that use a lot of CPU power and that are really well suited to the sound of the DeepMind 12. Since we have checked out the arpeggiator, I think that the really cool thing about this functionality is you can latch it, but also when you go in here, you can add swing. When it comes to the LFOs, they're really cool, they work, it's really easy to assign them, and you have that delay time that really, I believe, works beautifully. And it's easy to add some musical features using that delay time. The only problem I have with the LFOs that there should be a button in here to select the waveform, or actually two buttons to select the waveforms, because right now in order to do that you need to go in the menu. It's obviously not a big deal to go in the menu and select that, but it would just so much more intuitive and hands-on to have those selectors in here. And now we're moving on to the coolest functionality of the DeepMind 12, which is the mod matrix. You activate it by pressing mod in here, and you can see 8 parameters that you can assign the source and destination to anything that you want. I'm going to start by selecting LFO2 as my source in here, giving it a bit of depth, let's say 16. And as a destination, I'm going to go to oscillator 1 and 2 fine, which means that it's going to start drifting a little bit. So you can clearly hear it in action, and it gives it that beautiful detuned effect that I really loved on Flume's first album, for example. So another example of how I can use the mod matrix is assigning the VCF envelope to the tone mod on oscillator 2. So I already have my VCF assigned to pulse width modulation in here. So you can hear how it works with the filter. But now I can add another thing. Go in here, select envelope 2 in here, give it some depth, and then select the tone mod. Oh, tone mod. Alright, that's pretty cool. So right now, the pulse width modulation, the filter, and the tone mod all follow the same envelope. So obviously this is just scratching the surface of what you can do with that mod matrix. It's amazing. And the final really cool thing about the DeepMind 12 is that everything, and I mean everything, can be controlled by CC. So for example, if I want to use the Octatrack in here and just drop a little chord, maybe activate the arpeggiator, and for the chord I'm going to give it some more length. Now what I can do is I'm going to go to my CCs in here, select CC 27, which should be responsible for noise, and let's see. Yes. So now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to drop a couple of trigs in here. And this trig, I'm going to give it a lot of noise. And this one, I'm going to deactivate. Same here, a lot of noise, deactivate noise. And it's going to work as a snare drum. Alright, that's pretty amazing, and it's only scratching the surface, really. Yeah, so that's it. I really like the DeepMind 12, and I think it's a really powerful polyphonic synthesizer, and it really sounds awesome. But still, the most amazing thing about this synthesizer is the effects that it has. As we all know, analog synthesizers require effects to really sound good. And with this one, you have them on board, and they really, really sound great. So what's not to like? Alright, so that's it for this episode of Late Night Tips. Let me know in the comments if I should get the DeepMind 12, or maybe you'd recommend another analog polyphonic synthesizer. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing to catch more tutorials, more jams, and more opinions. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great night. Take care.